Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this afternoon's webinar. We're going to dive deeply into scheduling elementary specials, the thing that I know is favorite topic for so many of you if you're wrestling with elementary schedules. But today we'll walk through some of the things that we see as a kind of an effective flow and the things that you should be looking for as you do that. Some of those may be familiar. There may be a few takeaways that are a little different. And so we'll dive right into that today. And you'll be joined by myself, Craig Gibbons. I oversee the group that is responsible for our scheduling efforts. And Richard Viard, who is responsible as in part to those scheduling efforts, but also oversees our product development. So we actually have some products that are in and around scheduling that help people build master schedules for elementary schools, as well as special education or student services-based scheduling. So a lot of this that we're sharing with you today is from that work with thousands of educators. So we'll share with you today, and hopefully there'll be some takeaways for you. We've been around doing this work for a while, since 2004. So since 2004, working across the country and a number of different things, but all of our work is tied to this idea of blending really educational best practices and management techniques or best practices in management. And in reality, the school leaders, building leaders, you're wrestling with a lot of things, but most often it's how you use the resources you have, your time, your money, your people, you're building in the most effective ways to do the best things for kids. And so that's been our philosophy since we've started, and all of our work has those three elements to make sure that we can bring about lasting and sustainable change. We do have that opportunity, have had the great fortune, I should say, of working with districts across the country, whether they are large, small, suburban, urban, rural, and whether they are thriving or are wrestling with particular challenges. So quite a cross section of different districts and schools. The common thread here is that a lot of them are wrestling with the same problems or same challenges, if you will. And their only difference is really what resources they have available, right, to solve for those. But lots of common threads you'll see, and scheduling is one of those areas where people are wrestling with very similar things. But it generally leads to multiple ways to solve similar problems. So we'll share a few of those ideas today. We help folks as district management group through three primary pathways. One is learning. So we provide institutes and just-in-time learning opportunities, as well as we actually have a membership community that's focused around professional development for district leaders. We publish our ideas and our work, our thinking as we go with the nation through our district management journal, our magazine that we publish twice a year. We also do consulting. So if you know exactly what you need to do, but you need either different skills, resources, or staff, we can roll up our sleeves with you and be your partner in that work through our consulting. And then solutions, which is really the space where we're wrestling with those problems that continue to rear their head every year, the recurring challenges that schools and districts face. And we really try to come up with the recipes for success in and around those problem spaces. Scheduling is one of those that needs to be revisited every year and can either do the right things or challenge your ability to achieve your goals. So that is where our work lies, and where we'll talk a little bit about our experiences in that space today. Which brings us to the first poll. So we'd love to get some information from you as we go through. And by the way, as you listen in today, if you have questions, please go ahead. There's a QA feature on the Zoom ribbon bar there. Go ahead and use that to pose your questions, and we'll make sure we review those with the group. And we'll go through all of this today, and then make sure we have that space at the end to share thinking and ideas from questions. But the first poll, and let me go ahead and launch that. You had a chance to read it a little bit there, but we're looking for the following. What is your greatest challenge in scheduling specials? Is it the space constraint, shared staffing? Is it ensuring that kids are all getting access to the same specials, different sections, and trying to figure out that and how that works? Tradition getting in the way at all in terms of this is how we've always done it. Specials can be the thing that makes minds explode from time to time, or also just it's super intensive, time consuming, right? There's a lot of moving parts, and you move one and it unravels everything, or really everything. Is it all of that? So share your thoughts here. We'll take a moment for people to respond to that. We're getting some feedback in and around shared staff. That is something, as I noted, we've been doing this for a while. In the last 2 years, it just feels commonplace. You're actually in a special place if you're not sharing special staff or unified arts these days, it seems like. So kudos to you. And there's a bit of that tradition. So we've done things like this. We're looking for, a new way, different ways, and kind of thinking through that challenge. Got it. All right. So those are the two primary areas right there, sharing staff. And we've always done that. So very good. Thank you guys for sharing that. We'll have another poll later, but that gets us warmed up and hopefully helps us tune into the areas that might be most helpful. So from here, I'm going to hand it over to Richard Viard, who will walk us through these scheduling best practices.
Thank you, Craig. Hello, everyone. So we're going to work through sort of a workflow of a few things you may want to think about when you start scheduling your specials. And number one, we're going to talk about determining your school profile, which will help you sort of decide how many specials you should offer, how many days in your rotation, etc. So thinking about what type of school do I have to kind of guide you through that process. The second step will look at planning, essentially thinking about before you start scheduling, the what, the who, the when, and the where. We'll look at starting to actually build the rotations and build how each student classroom is going to receive those specials on a regular day basis. Addressing those uneven sections per grade. So as you know, it's nice when every grade has the same number of sections. You can kind of have those efficient staffing around those specials. But what when you have a grade that's larger or smaller than the other grades, and what happens, and how do you, what are some strategies around that? And then shared staff. So that was one of the challenges that was that was brought up, and so we'll talk a little bit about optimizing for shared staff. And then checking for conflicts. So you've done your schedules. You've spent many hours agonizing all the details of your schedules. How do you know that everything is correct and there's no conflicts, right? So we'll jump in to number one, which is determining your school profile. So what we mean by the school profile is really the number of sections per grade. And so, a school that has mostly 4 sections per grade, we call that a 4 sections school, or 3 section schools, or etc. So that's going to help us in determining how to approach special scheduling. And typically, and I say typically because there's so many exceptions to that, but ideally, the number of specials you offer should match the number of sections per grade and the number of days in your specials rotation. So we're going to unpack this a little bit. So in a typical, and one more thing to think about is in a typical K-5 schools, you would typically have 6 periods of specials per day. So each grade goes to specials at a different time. And so a teacher would teach K, then 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, and 5, depending on the order, but essentially in a day, they would cover every grade. So going back to that formula, number of sections, number of specials, number of days. So a typical example of a 4-section schools that would be ideal is to have 4 specials rotating on a 4-day cycle. So the 4 specials could be anything. For example, art, library, music, PE is an example. And this means that teachers will have one different classroom every day. So think about KA having art on Monday, KB having art on Tuesday, KC having art on Wednesday, etc. And so because you have 4 teachers and 4 sections, that works to not needing any more staff. And if you have 6 periods per day, staff is fully utilized. If you add an extra special on maybe a 5-day cycle, then every teacher would have downtime. Essentially, they would not be fully utilized unless you had partial FTE or staff that were shared with other schools. So I'm thinking right now about maximizing for staff within that one school. So continuing with that example, in a 5 sections per grade school, 5 classroom per grade, ideally you would have 5 specials on a 5-day rotation. So maybe it's art, library, music, and PE twice, or it could be art, library, music, any combination of 5 things, essentially 5 specials. And then, as you can expect, depending on the number of sections, if you have a larger school with 6 sections, ideally you would have 6 specials on a 6-day rotation. So maybe it's art, library, music, PE twice, STEM, etc. But again, all teachers would be teaching every day a different section. All sections will get all 6 or all 5 or all 4 of their specials, depending on the type of school. And then staff would teach those 6 periods. So I'm skipping over some details. This is like a typical school. Obviously, if you had a K2 school or for 3 to 5 school, there's fewer grades. One thing, so I essentially there might be only 3 periods in the day. What you could do is split each grade. So for example, what we see in the K2 school is there's a lot more classroom per grade very often. So if you had 8 classroom per grade, well, you're kind of back at that 4-section model, because you could have 2 periods per grade of specials, each having 4 sections essentially. So that will create your 6 periods with 4 sections per grade. And there's all kinds of exceptions to that. What if you have pre-K? What if you have, K to 8 school? So these, become challenges, to work around this formula. But this is kind of the easy path, kind of simple, simplified formula that you have to work around. So now we'll talk a little bit about planning. So before you start scheduling your special, it's a good idea to just stop and think about, what specials will be offered. So, and which grade. So the formula that I mentioned would work with having these different specials at different grade, except again, those teachers may not be teaching every period. So really thinking about what specials do we want to offer students at which grades, how often, etc. So really thinking about the specials themselves, who will be teaching. So do you, is this before budget season where you really want to think about how many teachers you're going to hire or need, or do you have set staff now that you need to essentially maximize their time and try to make everything work with the staff you have? So how much FTE of each staff? Do you have 2 PE teachers? Do you have 1.5? Do you, etc. With special, how long will be specials? So we have, we see things all over the place. We have schools that have 25 minutes of specials, all the way to schools that have 60 or 70 minutes of specials per day. Some schools have multiple specials in the same day. So there's really no set rule of how you set that up, but you have to think about it again, based on the staff you have, based on the other things you offer through the day. So obviously, if you have 70, 80 minutes of specials per day, that means your academics are going to be shorter, or unless you have a very long school day. So you have to take all these things into account. And also very often specials is that time where staff can do their planning, where homeroom teachers can do their planning or their common planning time. So again, we'll talk about that a little bit more, but we like to schedule specials at the same time for the same duration across the grade to create that common planning time opportunity for homeroom teachers. So really thinking about how many minutes of specials should we have, and then there might be contractual requirements around that. If teachers need to have 45 minutes of planning time every day, well, a 45-minute period for specials would make sense to start with. And then thinking also about where specials will be provided. So are there any room constraints? Is your gym in the cafeteria? So can you schedule gym during lunch recess, etc. So thinking about how that's going to work and what are any of the constraints you have in terms of rooms or capacity. So here's an example of a plan for a fairly simple school. We want to offer art, library, music, and PE for 45 minutes. Everything is the same duration, which makes things simple. And then maybe PE is twice a week. And so essentially right now you have a 5-day rotation, right? So 3 specials and then 2 PE. And then this is offered at every grade level. So this is a very straightforward kind of special schedule. A more complex format that we use, and we see a lot of schools in Illinois, for example, adopting a format like this, because they have a requirement at the state level of the number of minutes or number of instances of PE. And so in this case, K to 4, they need to provide PE 3 times a week. So they've decided to maybe do 25 or 30 minutes of PE. And then art, which requires more setup and more time on task, maybe that's double that period. So that's a 60-minute period in which two other specials can happen concurrently. So this is where you'd have a long specials and 2 short specials. So students would either get a long specials or 2 specials on that day that are shorter. And maybe in this case, pre-K is having some specials as well, but they're shorter, again, to maximize the staff time. So this would be a slightly more complex plan, right? Different durations of specials, different frequency per grade, different grade getting different minutes, etc. So once you've defined your school profile, you've kind of made your plans on how to build a schedule, which specials you'll offer, what, who, when, where. It's time to start building your rotation, right? So how do you go about that? So the way we like to start is really, again, I've mentioned this before, creating that common planning time opportunity for homeroom teachers. So that means that for each grade level, and this is, again, back to a simple example of a K-5 school, we have 4 sections per grade in this example, and I'm scheduling specials for the whole grade at the same time for the same duration. And right now I'm only worrying about where my specials will take place. I'm not thinking about art, I'm not thinking about music, just thinking about this is the time where specials will take place for this grade. They will have specials at the same time. And I'm creating those opportunities for common planning time. The other thing I do, obviously, is think about staggering this block through the day so that my specials teachers can go grade to grade. I may want to think about some transition time, so maybe leaving 5 minutes in between each period. And you can see this in this example here, sorry, on the side, where I have sort of a shadow of each period, so I can see that there's 5 minutes in between. Now that means that the rest of your schedule may need to push these one way or another, but when we start, we just like to start with the ideal special schedule, and then we'll deal with the rest. So you need to think about this transition time. Obviously, you need to think about specialists having their lunch and prep periods in the day. And then another thing we like to do as a nice thing is trying to go grade to grade in contiguous order. So going from a grade 5 to grade 4 to grade 3, there's less setup changes that may be going from a grade 5 to a kindergarten grade, where the gym or the art room would need to change quite a bit. So these are all things we start thinking about. But this is kind of the starting point of the master schedule, is really to lay down the specials and thinking about when specials will occur. So now that we've placed each of our periods on the schedule, we're thinking, for example, grade 5, which was the first block that I placed. We have 4 sections. We have 4 days in our rotation. So I'm going to start thinking about layering the first special. So special 1, maybe it's PE. So I'll have section A doing PE on day A, section B doing PE on day B, etc. And then I move on to the next special. So maybe that's art. So I'll have art for day B on section A, day C on section B, etc. So you see how that kind of cascades grade to grade. And then I'll move on to my next special. Maybe that's library, and I schedule library. And finally, the last special. So what you see here is, on any given day, each classroom has a different specials. That means you'll have a different teacher being available to teach the specials. And then on each day, that kind of rotates through the cycles. And then you simply repeat for each grade. So grade 4A will have special 1, grade 4B will have special 4, etc. So that's kind of the process we use. And this is actually a screenshot from our software. Our software generates this automatically based on the inputs, a number of sections and number of days and number of specials you offer. But it essentially creates a grid like this that is sort of staggered by day. So when you look at the staff utilization, as I mentioned, as long as you have 4 sections at every grade, in this case, each teacher will teach 6 periods every day for a total of 24 periods in a 4-day cycle, right? So if you had a 5-day cycle, then that would be 30 periods, etc. So what if the schedule is more complex? So this example that I was talking about earlier, where maybe the art block is longer, and then you have 3 times PE for 25 minutes, you have 2 times music, 1 time library, etc. So this is a little more complex. So the way we like to look at this is really thinking about laying out each grade one by one again. But I want to start with the biggest block. And The reason for that is just like, when you're moving and you put the biggest boxes in the van first so that you can then fit the smaller boxes later. So we start with the biggest block and we say, okay, we'll schedule section 5A on day A, section 5B on TB. So kind of the same way we started earlier. And because it's a longer period, I want to make sure I take that big block first. And then usually we move on to the special that has the most frequency, because we know we're going to have to schedule 3 times of that special. I'm going to go with PE. So I can't have section 5A have PE on day A because they're already doing art on both periods. And I want to schedule all the 5th grade within this block at 8 a.m. here. So I'm going to schedule 5A during PE here, and then 5B the next day, 5C the next day, 5D the next day. This way I have no conflicts between these specials. So now I need to schedule the next PE. I can schedule it on day A for the same reason as before. And I can schedule it on day B because 5A is already doing PE on day B. So my next logical place is probably going to be day C. So I'm going to schedule them on the second half, meaning that then I will continue 5B, 5C, and 5D. And then I need a 3rd period of PE. So can be day A, can be day B, can be day C now because they're already doing PE and we don't want 2 PEs on the same day. So I'm going to move on to day D. And you'll realize now I need a 2nd PE teacher because my 1st PE teacher is completely booked at that time. So I'm adding a PE teacher, and now I'm layering the 5th grade for their last PE. So now I'm moving on to music, which is my next highest frequency after PE. And using the same format. So 5A cannot be on Monday. Could be on Tuesday because on 5A is having PE on the 1st period. We can have 5A having music after PE. So then I continue 5B, 5C, and 5D. And then my 2nd section of music can be on day A, can be on day B now because I have 2 periods of 5A already. So probably the next logical place would be on day C. And now I cycle through everything. And then finally, you get the idea. I layer the library, which is my last block, and it's easy to fit. And so then once I've done this one grade and I figured and everything works within that grade, I can move on to the other grades and just duplicate exactly what I've done here. So 4A will have art on Monday, 4B will have library, etc. So I can just apply that and create this big schedule. But now it's simple. I just have to apply my rule that I created here. If there was something that didn't work on grade 5, I would just go back to this and redo this schedule. Maybe I want to have a day of rest between 2 PEs or something like this. So there's other consideration you may want to take as you do this, but this becomes a big puzzle essentially. And now you can see the number of periods taught by each teacher, very similar to the other system, but obviously some specials are shorter and some specials are doubled. All right, so that was the kind of the logic of building the rotation from starting from a very simple rotation to a much more complex rotation. And again, I'm staying with this schedule where all my grades are having specials at the same time for the same block. It's not always possible. You may have an art teacher that's not available in the morning. So that's kind of starting to put a lot of pressure on creating a good schedule, right? And now you have to have different sections having specials at the same time. Now you're creating fragmentation in your schedule. So I'm not showing you these examples because they're not ideal, right? And if you have to have them, well, that's the reality. But we don't want to start with that as a sort of best practice or ideal schedule. So how do you address uneven sections per grade? So all my examples were very nice. I had 4 sections per grade, 5 sections per grade, etc. But very often we'll see a school that has either 1 or 2 grades with fewer sections or 1 or 2 grades with more sections. So when a grade has fewer sections, you really want to think of your school profile as the profile with the most sections. So in this case, we have a combination of 4 and 3 sections. So we're calling it a 4-section school. And then during that period here, grade 5 has only 3 sections. So each teacher, every day, one of the special teacher will not have to teach this period. So on this first day here, I don't need a librarian. On day B, I don't need a music teacher. On day C, I don't need a PE teacher, etc. So this is a time where they could have an extra prep period. They could work on curriculum. They could assist with other things. If you have several of these in a row, you could actually have the teacher being shared with another school and coming to your school. So this is something where I would group all the grades that have fewer sections together at the beginning or the end of the day, so that teachers can travel to your school after being at the other school. And you would have to coordinate with the other school where they have the extra need for the teacher. It would be opposite of your schedule. So what you can see here when you look at staffing is that my teachers teach 6 periods per day, except on one day where they have a free period, or they teach 5 periods. And that's a different day for each special, because that rotates. So the more difficult problem, though, is what happens when you have one or more grade has more sections. So am I a 5-section school when I only need that extra period or that extra teacher during one period? What happens here with 5 sections, even though you're on a 4-day rotation with 4 specials, is that you would need an extra teacher. So on day A, probably you need an extra art teacher. On day B, you'll need an extra library teacher, etc. So one technique is to split that 5th section during specials into the other sections. So let's say you have 20 students in grade 5E. You divide them in groups of 4. 4 students go to section A, 4 sections go to section B, etc. So you just do that for specials. You're increasing the class size essentially, but what you're doing is reducing the need for one extra teacher of each special each day. Another technique, instead of just splitting this one classroom, which is not fair to that one classroom, you could actually take all the students from that grade and divide them into 4 groups, and then send these 4 groups to these 4 specials. So again, it's not ideal, but it deals with the need for an extra teacher. On the other hand, if you can have an extra teacher for another school who has that 3-section grade, maybe that will work. But remember that the teacher will need to travel if the school is far away. So you may need an extra period to be able to share a teacher on a day boundary like this during the day. So addressing that uneven number, right? So when there are too many variation per grade, you know, we see some schools, there's one grade with 3, one grade with 6, one grade with 5, one grade with 4. One model that we've seen in some schools is actually creating a different rotation for each grade. So for the grade that has 5 sections, they're on a 5-day rotation with 5 specials. The grade that has 4 sections is on a 4-day rotation with 4 specials. The grade that has 3 sections is on a 3-day rotation. So this adds a lot of complexity, right? Every grade level has to remember what a day letter they're on. The grades have different day letters depending on the date. It's a little complex to manage, but you're staffing to exactly your need. So that's one of the advantage. Drawback is a lot more complex to manage. Great. So optimizing for shared staff. So I know that was some of the issues that several of you have identified in the poll. And this brings up another poll. So Craig is going to launch this poll. And here we would like to see how many of you share staff with other schools. And it looks like, I would say 2/3 of you say yes, and 1/3 say no. All right, awesome. Thank you for answering that quickly. All right, so sharing staff obviously creates a new set of problems when we're thinking about specials. Ideally, what we try to do as much as possible is have staff spend the whole day at one school and then the whole day at another school rather than traveling during the day. When you staff travel during the day, they almost need one extra period of free time for that travel. So we try to reduce that, and also it's just simpler for everyone if the whole day can be spent at each school. So here is an example of what happens when, again, I'll stay with that 4-day rotation with 4 specials. What happens when we have a school in that district where every school is doing 4 specials on a 4-day rotation, but I have a school that has 3 sections per grade. So what happens if we've created a schedule in the model that we shared is that every day, 1 specials teacher is not needed. So on day A, I don't need a music teacher. As you can see, every period is going to have art, library, and PE. On day B, I'm not going to need a PE teacher because all my sections are going to do either music, art, or library, etc. So you get the idea. So really, effectively, you need 0.75 FTE of each special teacher at this school. So you could try to hire 0.75 FTE teachers and be all set, or you could try to share with another school that has the inverse problem. So in this school, they have 5 sections per grade. And so every day they need an extra teacher of 1 type of special. On day A, you can see that they need 2 music teachers. On day B, they need 2 PE teachers. On day C, 3. So effectively, they need 1.25 of each teacher. So again, they could try to hire 0.25 teachers for each special, which might be very challenging. But these 2 schools could share. They're complementary, right? One needs an extra teacher on one day. One needs 1 fewer teacher on each day. So essentially, these 2 schools combined need 2 FTE. And on the day that music teacher is not needed, you align that day of the other school with the day that 2 music teachers are needed. So this music teacher is going to school B on day A, and then spending the other 4 days on at the first school. So I hope that was clear. This is not always possible, but this is a good system for pairing schools within a large district, where there's a lot of different schools with different sections per grade, while we want all the schools to have exactly the same specials offering for students. And this model works well. So for example, if you had a 2-section school, right, you would pair that with a 6-section school. If you have a 1-section school, you pair with 7. You have all this combination, but essentially you're trying to create pairs of schools that complement each other based on the FTE needed. And then you line up the days so that the 2 schools that are pairing match their need for staff. So for schools that have uneven number of sections, obviously you're going to need at some point to travel during the day. So taking the example that I mentioned earlier, mostly 4 sections per grade, some grades have 3. Another school may have mostly, or half and half, 5 and 4. So what you want to do is schedule those periods that have fewer at the beginning or the end of the day. And so that will complement the teachers going to the other school. So in this case, K1 and 2 have only 3 sections. You schedule them at the end of the day. And where K1 and 2 at the school B needs an extra teacher, those teachers would be free that half of the day. So essentially, you want to use the opportunity by bunching the grades together where the teacher is needed at one school, so that you have a good opportunity to serve another school during that block of open time. And then finally, we want to check for conflicts, right? So a lot of elementary schools use Excel or magnet boards or Post-it notes to create schedules, and identifying errors is really difficult. So some of the things you want to check and double check if you're doing something in Excel, for example, is just making sure that you haven't overbooked the teacher. So making sure you're looking at the teacher's day. For example, in this case, my library teacher, that I haven't scheduled 2 sections at the same time or overlapping time. And then also making sure that you have not scheduled 2 sections of students, 2 classrooms at the same time for 2 specials. So again, in the software that we have, these are identified automatically. So this is actually a screenshot of the software where you'd see it automatically if there was a conflict that you created by trying to arrange all these sections. So just something to think about. I think, as you create your schedule, whatever tool you're using, there's a stage at the end where you just have to essentially look at each teachers and look at the teacher view and the teacher day, and really thinking about how is this day looking for this teacher? Did I leave enough time for travel? Did I leave enough time for planning? Did I leave enough time for personal lunch, etc.? The other thing you want to make sure is that you've also provided the same amount of time to students as you expected. So for example, if you wanted all students to get 75 minutes of PE, just making sure that as you look at the time allocated to each classroom, that there's not one classroom who has fewer minutes or more minutes than the other ones. So again, that's another check that we have in our software, which lets you quickly just look at a report and see, is my schedule equitable for students? Have I allocated exactly what I meant to allocate? So to wrap things up, we started by determining the school profile, number of sections per grade, to allow us to really think about how many specials we were going to offer for how many minutes, etc. We continued planning with what specials, who, what staff do we have, when do we schedule specials for how long. Then we started scheduling, creating those rotation and following the workflow of the schedule. And then we tried to address uneven number of sections per grade. So one more grade than other sections, one fewer grade, a lot of variations in the number of sections. Then we optimized staff for shared scenarios. And then finally, we checked for conflicts at the end when the schedule is done to make sure we didn't miss anything. So I'm going to, first of all, thank you for taking the time to look at these. Very interested if you have any questions around these, and if there's any questions we can answer, feel free to use the QA box, and I'm going to send it to Craig to wrap up.
Great, thank you, Richard. And Richard went through a fraction of these challenges, right, in a very quick, short order form here to hopefully give you a sense of maybe some possibilities as you're thinking about things that you're wrestling with in your schools. A lot of these too, there's variations of each one of those concepts Richard shared. And sometimes the puzzle is trying to figure out how all those concepts work in tandem in a complementary way. But lots of different things out there that people are challenged with when it comes to sharing staff. And not everybody's situation is exactly the same, but chances are there is a better way to do things if you're wrestling with that these days. The note here we have, this slide, is to just let you know that we do this work. We focus on it very intensely with the folks we serve. And whether that's master scheduling, which is what Richard was just talking about, because specials being in that realm, or special education scheduling, which is more about individualized student services scheduling. We do have that experience working with, as I was mentioning earlier, tens of thousands of educators across the country. So really understanding these problems pretty deeply. And understanding the variations, the several variations of each problem set, and how to solve for them in many different ways. So I share that to say we're also happy to just have you reach out to us if you have questions, and we're more than willing to share what we know. The URLs that are here, one of them, DMSchedules.com, that is the site that will tell you a little bit more about the software and share some resources there. There's also DM Group K12/resources. And that is really a number of periodicals we've written. There are blog posts out there. There are case studies. So that's a very resource-rich environment that is on our main company website. But feel free to go out there and peruse. There are also some toolkits and things you can do to challenge yourself in current thinking. And then also that email, scheduling@DMGroupK12. So if you do have questions or would like to talk more about what you're wrestling with, or how, if there's an opportunity for us to partner with you, we'd be happy to do that. So with that, let's pause here. Richard, did you pick up a few questions as you were looking through?
Not yet. I'm looking if anybody's. Feel free to add questions.
Yeah, there's the regrouping. That's always an interesting one. So regrouping is that concept, right, where you've got 4 sections in every grade, but that one grade, it's sticking out there, that bubble grade, right, where it's 5 sections. And so regrouping strategies, there's not just one way, as you know, as Richard was touching on, there are multiple. So regrouping and really what we're trying to do is make those 5 classrooms 4 just for specials, so that you have enough staff and you don't have to go out and kind of figure out how to handle that. And it's a strategy you can use each year as that bigger class moves through your school. But there are a number of different ways you can regroup. You can take a section of those 5 classrooms and have that section regroup into the other 4 sections. You can also say, you know what, I'm going to take all of the kiddos in that grade and mix them up and put them back together in 4 groups for specials if you want different levels of interactions and things like that. And then there's variations beyond that too. Some people will cycle through and say, we'll change which group is regrouping, semester to semester. So lots of different variations based on pushback or challenges or trade-offs that you might be wrestling with. But it can be a pretty effective strategy, assuming your classrooms aren't that big, right? If you have 30, 40 kids in a classroom, you can't really regroup one class in. You've already got really large classrooms. But that's a strategy that often works if you bump into that 5th section and maybe the classroom sizes are more like 17, 18 kiddos. When we look at dividing up one of those sections, we're talking about adding 4 kids to a classroom. So even when you take those 5 classrooms and make them 4, you're talking about 20 to 22 kids, which often can be manageable. So class sizes and things like that come into play as well. I see Blake put a note out here, any possible visual schedules on 6 sections per grade on a 5-day week. 6. Yeah, we can. I'm trying to think, Richard, if we have any. That's something we'll follow up with too, Blake. I'm just trying to think through any.
We don't have one that we can share immediately in this deck, but we might be able to find a school. Yeah, so ideally with 6 sections, again, on a 6-day rotation, that would be ideal. You would have 6 FTE or 6 teachers. We can look in if we have a school that has an example schedule with that and follow up with you. Yeah,
the other thing to think about there too is it's not ideal, but in terms of leveraging staff effectively, if you have a 6-section grade and a 4-section grade or something like that, is there a way that you could have those grades, that larger grade with more sections? Is there a way that you could have specials for that bigger class going at the same time as maybe a class that has fewer sections? So if your staff is limited, but when you kind of mix and match across the grades there a little bit, maybe you can get aligned with the staffing you have. That, of course, as Richard was sharing, can break up some of that common planning time and things like that. And there's ways where you can cycle that differently through the week for different classrooms. So not just one teacher or one class is moving to a different time, but there's ways they'll sometimes think about pairing larger groups of kids with smaller groups of kids to make sure that the staffing works. So that's another thing, and we could probably show you some visuals on that. But we're happy to follow up with that, Blake. There's definitely work we've done in that space. So yeah, regroupings, it's a tricky concept to get people to buy into. Often it's, well, if we can regroup, we get to keep our common planning time, and we get to keep some of these other things. So it's the mantra we have is you can schedule anything, just not everything. So it's everybody's situation is different, but so regrouping. Let's see what else we have out here. The software is what we noted here. That Richard, he had a few screenshots that he was manipulating specials. It has a master building visualization to it, and then it also has specifically the specials, developing the rotations and things like that Richard was showing. So all those were snippets from the DM schedules for elementary schools. The other note I'll share too is we do have additional webinars that we'll be sharing. One is around staffing, and it will touch on some of these similar techniques, but that's a webinar that we'll be sharing soon too, if that is of help, and we can share that in the follow-up email for today. We will share a recording of this session, so you have it as reference. Richard, anything else that I've overlooked out here for questions?
Well, I think that was it for questions that came in that I can tell. Yeah.
Okay, and it's great to see. I see some familiar faces out there in the audience, or at least names. So great to see you all. Hopefully you found some value in the time today and just seeing some of those different concepts being shared. Again, don't hesitate to reach out to us if there are concepts or techniques we can talk through a little further with you, or if you feel like we could be helpful to your school or your district. We're often eager to see and learn more about other folks and what they're wrestling with, and see how we can share what we know. So don't hesitate there. If there are no further questions, we'll go ahead and gift you back that time, that next 15 minutes. And again, welcome you to reach out to us. We truly appreciate your time. We know you got a lot on your plate, so thank you for spending it with us, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Bye-bye. Thank you.